Hello, welcome back to The Check-In. I'm Janet Saidi. When Lauren Brown arrived at MU as a freshman on campus in the fall of 2015, it was the first time she'd lived in a non-Black community. She was used to being taught by, mentored by, living among people who looked like her, and this was very different. She was trying to adjust, and as she was trying to adjust, a string of racist incidents took place on campus, sparking campus-wide and then nationwide protests. Lauren found herself in the middle of not only a personal journey, but also a national news incident. And she was learning to be a journalist. So now she has documented what this looked like and felt like and what she's learned from it all in a recent audio documentary from American Public Media's APM Reports series. And if you are a public radio nerd, you know APM Reports very well. So we're kind of impressed with Lauren Brown here at KBIA, and we wanted to talk with her about this documentary. It's called Black Mizzou, Confronting Race on Campus. Lauren Brown is also a former student of ours and a former producer here at KBIA, so it's a double pleasure to welcome Lauren to the check-in. Lauren Brown, welcome.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, so great to have you here. So let me ask a little bit. We're going to hear some clips from the documentary. People can go to APM Reports to hear the whole thing. It's about 50 minutes long, so it's just a cool audio documentary. We're a big documentary town, but a lot of people don't realize how awesome audio documentaries are, especially right now. Have a listening session. Check it out. We're going to hear some clips. Let me ask you first, Lauren, though, what was your reaction to being asked? You're a producer at St. Louis Public Radio right now. You do a really cool podcast called We Live Here. But you were approached by this national documentary team to tell this story that was a personal story and also a very political and public story. What was your reaction to that at first?
Right. So originally I was just supposed to work, as a freelancer on the project. I wasn't really supposed to be involved. But after visiting campus a few times, I started to tell them about my personal story.
Wow.
And I told them that, I wanted the documentary to be different. I wanted it to be about Black Mizzou, because a lot of times we talk to, the chancellor and all these different people that are always the source. And I wanted, Black Mizzou to be the source this time. I wanted Black Mizzou to have a voice this time. And that's really what I appreciated about the documentary.
That's incredible. I think you achieved that. And I want to hear a clip in a few minutes about you. At some point, we'll listen to you talking about Black Mizzou a little bit more in this documentary. And I really had never heard Black Mizzou defined before this documentary. So I really learned something from that, even though we have conversations like this all the time on the check-in and at KBIA and on our campus. But let me ask first, Lauren, a little bit more about this process, because it did turn into a very personal story. And it's really fascinating that they came to you wanting you to just work on it and advise them. And then the documentary does take us right to Mizzou. We go right to the quad, and you kind of give a tour, and you take us on a tour of Mizzou. Is that how this happened? Were you taking the producers on a tour of Mizzou and they thought, hey, this is actually the story?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. We walked back to Carnahan Quad and talked about, the day Tim Wolf resigned. And I talked about, what Concerned Student 1950 meant to me and what it meant to a lot of other Black students. And then I just kept talking. I was like, Black Mizzou, Black Mizzou. And they were like, what's Black Mizzou? Like, you keep saying this term. What does that mean? And I was like, it's a campus within a campus. It's a community that we built with each other. During that time I was a freshman, so I didn't know a lot of people. But during that time, I made friends with people that I didn't know, because we were, going through this thing together. And so it's really something that was really powerful. And if you go on now, you've seen hashtag Black at Mizzou and things of that nature. And so Black Mizzou is really just a community within a campus, and just a family, people that you can depend on, and that they can depend on you as well.
That's fascinating. Well, Lauren, we have a clip. Let's listen to a little bit of this documentary, which is you in the documentary kind of explaining what Black Mizzou is and how it came about. This is about a minute long. We'll listen now.
Activist students are following suit from Yale to Ithaca College.
Dozens of University of Michigan students took to the streets this morning to protest racism at the school.
I agreed to help these producers do a documentary looking back at that year, but I didn't want to do just another story about protests at Mizzou. The stories I've seen in the news make it seem like a couple of bad things happened out of nowhere. Then there were protests and things went back to normal. But that's not what I saw. I saw students put their grades on the line, their jobs, their reputations, so they could tell people what was really going on at their school. And that's what I want to tell you about. What it's like to be a black student on a predominantly white campus, because this is the same reality black students face all over the country. I want to tell you what we went through, and how we took care of each other, and how we built a community for ourselves that we call Black Mizzou.
Right, that's Lauren Brown. She's our guest here on the check-in today. We're talking with Lauren about a documentary that she's produced with American Public Media and their APM Reports series. It's called Black at Mizzou, Confronting Race on Campus. We're talking about Lauren's experience on campus in the fall of 2015 as a freshman and how she's recently made sense of it all in the recent documentary. Lauren, in this clip, you talk about it occurs to me that the narrative about the protests is still very fragmented. You still will hear people talk about it with pride, that it was our students that took us forward like protests in history have done. They were interacting with a grand tradition that is American and that is academic, which is demonstrating to take us forward for progress. But you still hear people talk about the protests as a disaster, a sort of mess that led to tuition decreases, et cetera. But what you are also mentioning in this clip and that you explore in the documentary is the sacrifices that students made. They took a break, a lot of those students from their education, and decided to try to make their university better. They also, as you're very much telling the story of in this documentary, built a community around this, and part of that community is Black at Mizzou. Can you talk about that narrative and what you would like to see us, how we talk about the 2015 protest and what that meant to you and what you saw back then?
Yes, and so really it was so personal to me because, I just got dropped into the middle of Missouri somewhere I had never been. And, I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. And when I experienced certain, racist attacks and things of that nature on campus, I knew who to call. I knew who I could reach out to. I knew that I had this community. And when they sat outside my dorm and helped me that night, that's when I really knew that Black Mizzou is something that will, always be around because we're always there for each other. And Marshall Allen, who's a part of the original 11 of Concerned Student 1950, he said, this is the story you didn't get to see on CNN. This is what you didn't see on ESPN and things of that nature. It's something that people really had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, month-to-month, year-to-year. And I think that some of that got lost in some of the bigger outlets. It kind of seemed like, oh, this thing just popped up out of nowhere. And it was like, no, it's years and years of this. Even talking with Mike Middleton, you see that these things are going on, 50 years ago. And so those things are still happening. And I think that, what got lost was just, how it affected Black students and how Black students overcame that and how Black students achieved something, even if it was something small. We achieved something, and we also, made a better campus for Black students during that time.
All right. You just mentioned something, Lauren, and I want to explore a little bit of what you've just said that Mike Middleton experienced, that Peyton Head also experienced, and we have a little bit of a clip where you talked with Peyton Head. But let me go back a minute to what you just mentioned, that, as a freshman back there in 2015, as these events were playing out publicly, you were also undergoing some personal harassment, being a Black student in a dorm. There were some boys, I think, that were in your dorm, which must have been terrifying, that were just kept harassing you. And you literally chased them at one point. But then, and you kind of described this story in the documentary. But then what happened was a couple of guys said, hey, we're going to sit outside your room. This is not acceptable, and here's our answer. And that was basically what brought you community and a sense of safety, was just this community, this Black at Mizzou community. And it turns out that one of the guys sitting outside your dorm was Marshall Allen, who was a main leader of the Concerned Student 1950 movement. So in that moment. You were really uniting a very personal story with a very public one. And a really emotional time in this documentary is when you encounter Marshall. You kind of meet him on campus with the microphones on you and talk with him. It's a really emotional moment in the piece. What was that like in real time, meeting up with Marshall Allen all these years later, or 5 years later, to chat about what he did and how it helped you?
Yes, so I didn't expect to, overcome, so much emotion. I literally was like, I thought about it. I was like, I never thanked him for that. I never had a face-to-face conversation and just said, that meant so much to me, being 6 hours away from home. I didn't have my parents, didn't have, family or friends that could, help me with that situation. I felt like I was all alone, and I had never spoke to him about it. And as I was talking, I was just getting so overwhelmed with emotion, and I started crying, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't trying to cry, while the mics were on, but it was just a conversation. It was just such a natural, genuine conversation. Mm-hmm. And, Marshall was like, this is, people always think that it's this like grandiose idea, but he was like, it's those small things. He was like, I would sit out there every night for her. I would sit out there every night for anyone, for anybody that needed it. And I think that was so powerful because, all I did was type up what happened, put it on Twitter. And, a couple of people from the movement actually DM'd me on Twitter and said, can we meet up at the Black Culture Center so we can talk about this? And so that's how I got introduced to Marshall, and I talked to him about it. And he was like, well, we'll stay out there tonight. Do you need us tonight? Do you need us tomorrow? And I really was so appreciative of that. And that's why I was so emotional, because I was like, man, I didn't realize just how important that moment was for me until I looked back at it, years later.
All right, let me just remind people you're listening to The Check-In. We're talking with Lauren Brown. She's an MU alum, also a J School and KBIA alum. She's a public radio producer, and she recently produced a piece for APM Reports called Black at Mizzou, Confronting Race on Campus. It combines her personal story arriving as a freshman in the fall of 2015 with the story that became very political and public and that she's revisited as a journalist now in this documentary. Lauren, you mentioned Mike Middleton, who you speak to. You also speak with Peyton Head, and it is fascinating. This is revealed in this piece. I had not realized it. That he did undergo it was a racial slur being shouted at him on campus as a sophomore that motivated him to run for president, so that of the student body, so that when it happened again, which it did, he would be president of the student body and he'd have a platform, and his experience would mean something. You mentioned, Lauren, a few minutes ago that this happens over and over, that Black students at Mizzou experience. Peyton Head says something similar. By the way, I think it's interesting that, Mike Middleton joined us on the check-in and mentioned that on his first day on campus way back in the day, he became a really prestigious civil rights attorney. He's become a campus leader at MU after 2015, and you really tell his story. But he told us on the check-in that his first day on campus as a freshman, he also had a racial slur shouted at him. So this is something that's been happening and happens a lot, and it spurred Peyton Head to action. Let's hear this clip where Peyton Head is talking to Lauren Brown in this documentary about the community that was built by these challenges and by the demonstrations.
We are forever connected. All of us who were there at that time will forever be connected.
Here's Peyton Head.
I think the solidarity was so important, especially when the media started to tell this story of Mizzou, the story that they wanted to tell, because a lot of the media was talking about how bad Mizzou was. I remember one headline said, Mizzou, a hotbed of racial harassment. America is a hotbed of racial harassment. And when we don't admit that, I think that we don't allow ourselves to be able to say, like, hey, there's some issues that we can solve together. We can work on this together. But you have to call it what it is.
Okay, that's Peyton Head, one of the Concerned Student 1950 activists, talking with Lauren Brown, who's our guest here on the Check-In right now, and they're talking in her documentary that she recently produced with American Public Media, Black at Mizzou, Confronting Race on Campus. It's about her personal story and how it met the political at Mizzou in the fall of 2015. Lauren, what do you think about what Peyton is saying there? He's saying, There was a tendency for journalists, and he says this, for the media to kind of reduce this to, oh, look at Mizzou. Mizzou, we do need to look at Mizzou, and Mizzou needs to look at Mizzou, but we also need to look at our country and the systems. What did you think of, and what did you make of Peyton's statement there?
Right. I remember, being a freshman and calling my dad and him saying, this is the real world now. You're in the thick of it. This is the real world. These are things that you're going to have to deal with, not just on campus, but in this world as a whole. And basically what Peyton was saying is that, this isn't just a college campus thing. This isn't just a university thing. This is something that Black people face every day, just their simple being. And a lot of things that he said, it really struck me, because it was just like, this is something that we deal with 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It never goes away. And I just wish that a lot of those news outlets really told that story and really showed that this isn't something that just popped up out of nowhere. This is something that's repeatedly happened over and over again. And these students are just trying to make a safer place for themselves, a place to feel more comfortable. And the fact that we had to do that we had to, miss out on classes, miss out on, jobs, just to do that is sad.
And we can and should, I think, as a campus community, be proud of students that take that stand and decide to do that and to make those sacrifices. I don't think that's a partisan statement. I don't think it's a criticism. I think it's just simple. If you know the mission of a university and you know your history, you can be proud of students who respond and react in that way. Lauren, let me ask you something. We've only got about 45 seconds, and you could probably write a book, literally, or make another whole documentary about this with an answer to this question. If for a freshman a Black student arriving as a freshman on Mizzou campus, what advice would you give her?
I would give them the advice of, own who you are, own your Blackness, and don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, and don't let, society discourage you from the things that you want to achieve. Because a lot of times people discourage me, from applying to the J school, for going to the J school. And, I had to work through that. And as Black students, as Black people, we have to work through that adversity, and just know that if you decide to be on a predominantly white campus, that 9 times out of 10, you will hit some adversity. And just to know that, this documentary, listen to this documentary, learn from it, so that you can have the tool set to be ready when that adversity comes.
Lauren Brown at KBIA and the J School, we're proud of you. Thanks for the work you're doing. We need to come have you back as a guest lecturer sometime. But in the meantime, good luck with your producing career, and please stay well and stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye-bye. That was Lauren Brown. And that's it for this week's check-in. You can see Lauren Brown's APM Reports documentary. It's called Black at Mizzou, Confronting Race on Campus. It's at apmreports.org. The check-in is produced by Christopher Husted, Ryan Famuliner, and me. We've had help from Zia Kelly, who has moved on to a great job. She got hired. Thanks for all you've done with us, Zia. We get help from Hannah France, Olivia Moses. We will be back next Thursday, same time and same place. You can podcast this and many other episodes of the check-in at kbia.org. I'm Janet Saidi. See you next Thursday. Stay well and stay in touch.